Flight attendant kicks black billionaire. Family off plane finds out they own the airline. They were completely unaware of the situation they were entering when a flight attendant removed a black family from first class. At first, it appeared to be another instance of discrimination, but soon the reality emerged. This family wasn't merely affluent. They owned the entire airline. What transpired next altered the course of events entirely. Before we dive into the story, please share where you're tuning in from today. And if you appreciate narratives like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. The boarding gate was alive with energy as passengers hurried about, eager to, as they settled into their seats. A family of three caught the eye. Michael Carter, his wife Celeste, and their 5-year-old son Liam. James, clad in a tailored Navy suit, carried a sleek leather briefcase, his demeanor radiating quiet confidence. Celeste, poised and radiant in a flowing ivory dress, held Liam's tiny hand as he skipped beside her, giggling. The family eagerly anticipated their trip, a much-needed escape from their busy lives. Upon entering the aircraft's first-class cabin, the polished interiors shimmered under the cozy glow of cabin lights illuminated James as he looked at the seat numbers, a subtle smile on his face. "Here we are," he said to Celeste, leading her and Liam to their seats. Nearby passengers exchanged brief, polite nods as the Andersons began to settle in. Celeste assisted Liam in climbing into his seat, handing him a small toy airplane that brought a bright smile to his face. Meanwhile, James placed their carry-ons in the overhead compartment. Across the cabin, a flight attendant named Jessica Harper watched the family with a keen eye. Her lips pursed as she observed them. Pressing into a thin line, she adjusted her crisp uniform as if readying herself for action and strode briskly toward their seats. Her forced smile barely masked the judgment in her eyes. "Excuse me," Veronica said, her voice laced with authority as she addressed James. "May I see your boarding passes?" James turned to her calmly and retrieved the passes from his jacket pocket. "Of course," he replied with a polite nod, handing them over. Celeste looked up, sensing a hint of tension in Veronica's tone, while Liam remained oblivious to the situation. Exchange played joyfully with his toy, while Veronica scrutinized the tickets with an intensity that seemed excessive. Her brows furrowed as she double-checked the details. "First class?" she questioned, her voice wavering slightly as if the words were difficult to accept. James nodded again, keeping his composure. "Yes, these are our seats," he replied in a steady tone. Though Celeste noticed a brief flash of irritation in his eyes, Veronica paused, her unease evident. "I'm sorry, but I need to confirm something with the front desk, please." "Remain seated," she said sharply before turning and striding away, her footsteps quickening, her movements tense as Veronica vanished behind the curtain. James settled back in his seat, his expression inscrutable. "What was that about?" Celeste inquired softly, her voice tinged with worry. James placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Probably just a routine check. Don't worry," he replied, though the slight tightening of his mouth hinted at something more. In the galley, Veronica was on the phone with a ground staff member, her voice low but, "This is urgent," she said, casting a glance back at the cabin. "There's a family in first class, and I'm uncertain about the validity of their tickets. Could you verify their booking?" The ground staff member appeared perplexed. "The Andersons. Their tickets were bought weeks ago and are fully confirmed. Is there a problem?" Veronica hesitated, fighting to conceal her annoyance. No problem," she replied curtly, ending the call abruptly. However, rather than going back to the Andersons with an apology, her demeanor hardened. She straightened her posture, taking a deep breath. Taking a breath before returning to the first-class cabin, she approached their seats once more, her voice now more assertive. "I'm sorry, but I need you to step aside for a moment. There seems to be an issue with your booking." Celeste furrowed her brows, exchanging a glance with James, while Liam looked up from his toy, puzzled by the sudden tension. James rose to his feet slowly, his calm demeanor concealing the frustration simmering beneath. "What kind of error?" he asked, his voice steady. "I need to confirm your seating," Veronica replied, avoiding his gaze as she gestured. "If you could follow me toward the galley, please." James hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, gesturing for Celeste to remain seated with Liam as he trailed behind. A whisper began to ripple through the cabin, and passengers exchanged curious glances, sensing that something unusual was happening. Celeste observed them leave, her unease intensifying. Liam tugged at her sleeve, aware of the shift in the atmosphere. "Mommy, what's happening?" he asked softly. She smiled at him, though her grip on his hand tightened slightly. "Nothing, sweetheart," she replied gently. "Daddy's just sorting something out." Deep down, she sensed that this was anything but ordinary. Something felt off, and her instincts warned her that the situation was on the verge of intensifying. In the galley, James remained composed, his demeanor steady as Veronica struggled to articulate her thoughts. "Sir," she started, her voice carrying an unusual blend of uncertainty and authority, "we're attempting to resolve a seating issue. It seems your reservation has been flagged." James arched an eyebrow, his tone both pointed and measured. "Flagged? I booked these tickets weeks ago, fully paid and confirmed. What exactly is the issue?" Veronica crossed her arms, adopting a defensive posture. "It's not about payment, it's just that first class is a premium cabin, and we have to ensure all seating is accurate." James stared at her for a moment, processing the implication. His lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but in disbelief. "Premium cabin?" he repeated. "Are you suggesting that I don't belong here?" Veronica stiffened, suddenly aware of how her words might have sounded. "Of course not," she replied quickly, her tone sharp as if to mask her discomfort. "We simply need to adhere to the protocol." James inhaled deeply, his composed demeanor revealing a hint of annoyance. "Very well," he replied, his tone unwavering. "Let's settle this swiftly. My family is waiting." Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers exchanged hushed whispers. Celeste sensed the intensity of their gazes, but maintained her attention on Liam, who was now nervously playing with his toy. A middle-aged man sitting across the aisle leaned in, his face showing concern. "Is everything all right?" he asked quietly. Celeste responded with a strained smile. "It's fine." It was merely a misunderstanding, she claimed, though her tone was unconvincing. The man nodded but shot a look toward the galley, where James and Veronica had vanished, sensing there was more to the situation than appeared. As James waited, Veronica moved aside to converse with a younger flight attendant named Emily Stone. Emily Stone's expression tightened as she listened, casting a quick glance at James. "Did you check the reservation system?" Emily Stone inquired, her tone wary. Veronica frowned. "Yes, but it's not just about the ticket." "Look at him," she whispered. Gesturing towards James, "does he appear to be the typical first-class passenger?" Emily Stone's eyes widened in mild surprise. "You can't make those kinds of judgments," she responded firmly, her voice lowering to a whisper. "If his ticket is valid, that's all that matters." Veronica huffed as she brushed past Emily Stone to approach James. "Sir," she said, her tone sharp, "I'm afraid I must ask you and your family to move to the main cabin until this is resolved." James tilted his head slightly, his expression inscrutable. "On what grounds?" he inquired. The voice held a weight that caused Veronica to pause. "As I mentioned, it's protocol," she replied stiffly, avoiding his gaze. James's patience began to wear thin. His voice dropped, carrying a firmness that made Veronica flinch. "If you're implying we should leave first class, I expect a clear and valid reason. Right now, it seems you're acting on something other than protocol." Veronica opened her mouth to respond but was cut off by a sudden chime over the intercom. The captain's voice resonated through the cabin, calm yet authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, kindly stay seated while we make a few final adjustments to ensure your comfort for the rest of the flight." The announcement barely registered with Veronica, who sensed her composure beginning to falter. James shot her a long, pointed glance before pulling out his phone. "Excuse me," he said tersely, turning away as he made a call. His tone was steady, but the authority in his words was unmistakable. "Is this still the right time?" he asked into the phone. After a brief pause, he added, "Good. Proceed as planned." He ended the call. He quickly redirected his focus to Veronica, his calm demeanor now disconcerting. "Shall we return to my family?" James inquired, his tone both courteous and assertive. Veronica hesitated, her confidence wavering, but she nodded stiffly and led the way back to the cabin. Yet something about James's composure made her stomach twist as they neared the first-class section. All eyes turned toward them, and James's return was met with murmurs, passengers clearly sensing the tension in the air. Celeste stood, her gaze locking with James's in a silent inquiry, to which he responded with a reassuring nod. However, there was a slight change in his expression that only she perceived, a look that indicated the matter was far from resolved. Veronica felt a sense of unease as she guided James back to his seat. Her thoughts were in turmoil, yet she upheld her professional demeanor. Celeste welcomed James with a silent, questioning glance, but he responded with a comforting squeeze of her hand. Liam, noticing his father's arrival, lit up with joy and continued playing with his toy airplane, unaware of the underlying tension. Before James could completely settle in, Veronica reappeared, her expression determined. With determination, she began, her voice clipped. "We've decided it would be best for you and your family to move to the main cabin until we can fully verify your reservation." Celeste's jaw tightened, yet she maintained her composure, stealing a glance at James to gauge his reaction. James took a slow, deliberate breath and looked directly at Veronica, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Our tickets have been verified. We paid for these seats in full. If there's a valid reason for us to move, I'd like to hear it now." Veronica hesitated, her confidence wavering under the weight of his words. James's unwavering stare caught the attention of other passengers, their whispers escalating in volume. An elderly woman a few rows back leaned toward her companion and murmured, "They've been perfectly polite. What's the problem?" A younger man nearby chimed in, his voice raised for all to hear. "They're paying customers like everyone else. Why are they being singled out?" The increasing chatter seemed to unsettle Veronica even more. "Sir, I don't want to escalate this," she said, her tone becoming sharper. "Please cooperate, or I'll have to involve security." Celeste's eyes narrowed at her. The tension in the air was palpable as patience began to fray. Before she could utter a word, James raised a hand, signaling her to remain composed. He stood up slowly, adjusting his suit jacket with careful precision. "If you're calling security," he said in a steady tone, "make sure they come ready with an explanation." The challenge in his voice sent a shiver through the cabin. Veronica's expression shifted slightly, but she remained resolute. "Please gather your belongings," she insisted, her voice now tinged with a hint of urgency. James held her gaze for an extended moment. Before addressing Celeste, he spoke softly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "It's fine," he said. Passengers observed in silence as James, Celeste, and Liam rose to gather their belongings. Liam grasped his toy airplane, his earlier enthusiasm now overshadowed by confusion. Celeste maintained her composure, her expression inscrutable as she held Liam's hand. James guided them toward the main cabin, his steps steady and purposeful, despite the pressure of numerous gazes upon them. As they moved, James reached into his pocket and sent a brief message on his phone, his expression revealing nothing. They were guided to the cramped seats in the middle row of the main cabin. James assisted Celeste in settling Liam into his new seat before taking a place beside them. The stark contrast between the spacious luxury of first class and the tight confines of the main cabin was evident. Yet neither James nor Celeste displayed any outward signs of discomfort. Meanwhile, Veronica made her way back to the galley, her nerves fraying as she caught snippets of conversation from the first-class passengers. Something felt off, particularly when she overheard one man. They whispered about having tickets and questioned why they were being treated this way. Another remarked that this would surely backfire. Veronica chose to disregard the comments, yet her unease intensified as she approached the galley phone. It buzzed unexpectedly, causing her to jump. She answered it cautiously, her voice trembling. "This is Veronica." The captain's voice came through, authoritative and direct. "Miss Summers, I've just received a call from the airline's executive team. They've been contacted directly by a passenger on this flight. I need to know exactly what's happening." Veronica's stomach sank as she fumbled over her words her confidence fading as she faced what seemed like a routine issue. She stammered, "I thought there might have been a mistake with their tickets." A long pause followed on the other end, and when the captain spoke again, his tone was laced with caution. You need to handle this carefully. We cannot afford a situation like this. I suggest you tread lightly until further notice." Veronica hung up the phone, her palms clammy. She glanced toward the main cabin where James sat with his family, his expression calm yet imbued with a quiet intensity that caused her stomach to twist as she first felt the heavy burden of her choices pressing upon her, along with the dawning realization that she had misjudged the person she was up against. James occupied the main cabin, his posture upright and composed, as if the transition to a cramped seat had not affected him at all. Celeste sat next to him, her hand gently resting on Liam's shoulder while he played with his toy airplane. Though she appeared calm on the surface, her sharp glances toward the first-class cabin revealed her growing frustration. In contrast, James seemed unfazed as he took out his. The phone sent a concise message before leaning back, exuding a calm sense of authority. In the first-class cabin, the murmurs among the passengers had intensified. A tall man in a well-fitted suit leaned toward Veronica as she passed by. "That family has valid tickets," he stated, his tone laced with criticism. "What exactly is the problem?" Veronica attempted to maintain a steady voice, though her anxiety was evident. "It's just a procedural matter. Everything's under control." The man frowned but chose not to pursue the issue further, though his disapproval lingered. It was clear that Veronica rushed back to the galley where her colleague Emily Stone was arranging refreshments. Emily Stone gave her a disapproving look as she passed over a tray of drinks. "You need to address this," Emily Stone said quietly. "That man isn't just any passenger. He's been composed, but I can sense he's not going to overlook this." Veronica stiffened. "I was merely following protocol. It's not my fault if people struggle with being questioned." Emily Stone placed the tray down with more force than intended, her patience evidently running out. "Protocol doesn't mean you sing. You've made assumptions about single people, and now the whole cabin is turning against you." Veronica opened her mouth to respond but paused when the galley phone buzzed again. Her stomach twisted as she answered it. This time, the voice on the other end wasn't the captain's. It was from the airline's executive office. "Miss Summers," a calm but firm voice said, "we've received a direct complaint from a passenger on your flight regarding the handling of a seating issue in first class." Veronica's breath caught as she tried to explain, but the voice cut her off. "Clearly, you need to preserve your explanations. You've taken away a family with fully confirmed first-class tickets. The passenger in question is Michael Carter. I recommend you search for his name in the system right away." Veronica's hands shook as she concluded the call and turned to the nearby service computer, her fingers awkwardly navigating the keyboard. When Michael Carter's profile appeared on the screen, her heart dropped. Next to his name was a special designation: executive-level primary shareholder. Veronica's mouth went dry. This was no ordinary passenger. Anderson wasn't just affluent, he was one of the airline's owners. In the main cabin, James observed as Veronica stepped out of the galley, her complexion drained and her gait uncertain. She approached their row with hesitation, her typical confidence noticeably missing. "Mr. Anderson," she started, her voice soft and shaky, "I'd like to apologize for the inconvenience. It appears there was an error on my part." James turned to her slowly, his expression composed yet inscrutable. "An error?" he echoed, his tone even. "You removed my family from first." The class was centered around what exactly Veronica had just said, her voice trembling as she struggled to find the right words. I made an error in confirming your reservation. I promise it won't occur again." Celeste shot a piercing glance at Veronica, her composure beginning to unravel. "You humiliated my family in front of everyone here. You made unfounded assumptions about us. Do you honestly believe that an apology suffices?" Liam glanced at his mother, feeling her tension, and shifted awkwardly in his seat. James gently placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Celeste," he said softly, his tone calm. "Let's not—" He turned back to Veronica, his gaze intense. "I'll address this matter directly with your superiors," he stated, his tone steady yet assertive. "For now, we will stay put." Veronica nodded rigidly, uncertain of how to react. She retreated to the galley, her steps hurried and unsteady, the gravity of her error beginning to dawn on her. though she still couldn't fully comprehend the extent of the repercussions. James leaned back in his seat, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He had made his move, and now it was only a matter of time before Veronica returned to the galley, her hands trembling as she clutched the counter for stability. The truth about Michael Carter hit her hard, leaving her in a state of shock. She mentally revisited every encounter with the family, each one now a stark reminder of her missteps. She stole a glance at Emily Stone, who regarded her with a blend of disappointment and sympathy. "Did you know?" Veronica whispered, her voice unsteady. Emily Stone sighed and shook her head. "No, but it doesn't matter. You treated them unfairly, and now it seems you're going to—" Veronica's stomach twisted as she prepared to reply. The phone buzzed again, and she paused, her fingers hovering over the receiver before finally answering. The captain's voice was taut. "Miss Summers," he said, his tone brooking no dissent. "I've just received another call from the executive office. Mr. Anderson's identity has been confirmed, and they are not pleased. The instructions are explicit. He and his family must be reinstated in first class immediately, and you are to deliver the message personally." "Apology." Veronica's grip on the phone tightened as she managed to respond, her voice barely a whisper. When the line went silent, she leaned against the counter, her heart racing. Emily Stone crossed her arms, her gaze unwavering. "You brought this on yourself. Do the right thing before it gets worse." Summoning the last of her courage, Veronica adjusted her uniform and walked back toward the main cabin. Each step felt heavier than the one before, the weight of her mistake pressing down on her. Approached the Anderson family, and the other passengers turned to observe, their curiosity evident. "Mr. Anderson," Veronica spoke again, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "On behalf of the airline, I would like to sincerely apologize for the inconvenience your family has experienced. It was an error in judgment, and I take full responsibility." Celeste raised an eyebrow, her expression a blend of anger and disbelief. "Now you realize it's an error?" she asked, her voice icy. Veronica's face flushed, but she maintained her professional tone. "The executive office has directed that your family be escorted back to first class without delay. I will personally guarantee that your seats are prepared and that no additional disturbances take place." James regarded her for a prolonged moment, his face inscrutable. Then with a slight nod, he rose and motioned for Celeste and Liam to accompany him. Celeste grasped Liam's hand firmly as they passed Veronica, her posture upright and her eyes fixed ahead. Liam, still oblivious to the seriousness of the situation, clutched his toy airplane, skipping lightly beside his mother as they moved forward. Upon reaching first class, Veronica diligently prepared their seats, making sure every detail was just right. She set sparkling water on the tray tables and adjusted the pillows with trembling hands. James, Celeste, and Liam settled in, their demeanor calm yet distant. As Veronica stepped back, she offered a final apology, saying, "If there's anything else you need, please let me know." James nodded lightly, his tone polite but firm. "We'll let you know." Veronica retreated to the galley, her face pale and her nerves frayed. She had followed the captain's instructions, orders, but the harm had already been inflicted. The whispers in first class had faded, yet the disapproving gazes from the passengers remained. Emily Stone stood silently in the galley, shaking her head as Veronica came back. "It's not over," Emily Stone said softly. "You know that, right?" Veronica remained silent, fully aware that Emily Stone was correct. James's composed exterior was not a sign of forgiveness. It was the calm of someone who had already initiated the process of accountability. For the first time, Veronica grasped the reality of her actions' consequences. As the flight began to return to a sense of normalcy, Veronica struggled to concentrate on her remaining responsibilities, her mind clouded with anxiety. Each look from the passengers felt like a silent judgment, and every interaction served as a reminder of her earlier mistake. She stole a glance at the first-class cabin where James and his family were seated. They appeared composed, yet their presence felt burdensome. James, however, was anything but passive. Sitting upright, he tapped rhythmically on his phone. The movements were purposeful as Celeste leaned back, her expression inscrutable, while Liam contentedly sipped juice from a small carton. The serene image they presented only heightened the discomfort in the cabin. Veronica wasn't alone in sensing the tension. Emily Stone, quietly watching, had caught snippets of conversation among the first-class passengers. "Do you think they'll file a formal complaint?" one man whispered to his companion. Another passenger replied, "If it were me, I'd take it straight to the top." In the galley, the phone buzzed once more, causing Veronica to freeze. The sound, now associated with dread, filled the air as she picked up the phone with hesitation, her voice trembling. "This is Veronica." The captain's tone was more incisive this time. "Miss Summers, I've just received another update from the executive office. Mr. Anderson's legal team is closely monitoring the situation. They've requested a full account of events and will be waiting upon landing. I suggest you prepare yourself." Veronica's grip on the receiver tightened. "Yes, Captain," she replied faintly before disconnecting. The message was unmistakable. Michael Carter wasn't backing down. Fade into the background. Back in first class, James completed another message and leaned back, finally putting his phone down. Celeste looked at him with curiosity. "You've been quiet," she said gently, her tone full of empathy. James met her gaze, his expression steady yet determined. "This isn't just about us," he replied. "It's about accountability. People like her need to realize that actions have consequences." Celeste nodded, her gaze softening. She understood her husband's methodical, intentional, and impactful approach. It was what had driven him forward, to where he stood today as a man of influence who refused to accept injustice, regardless of its size. Meanwhile, Veronica paced in the galley, her nerves fraying. Emily Stone approached her carefully. "What's the plan now?" she asked. Veronica shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know. I never imagined something like this would escalate so far." Emily Stone's expression grew stern. "You should have considered that before treating them the way you did. Now it's beyond your control." Veronica shot her a glare, but remained silent, the weight of Emily Stone's words hanging in the air. Cutting deeper than she wished to acknowledge, the rest of the flight felt prolonged, the drone of the engines barely alleviating the tension. Passengers in first class occasionally stole glances at James and his family, their faces reflecting a blend of curiosity and admiration, while others feigned indifference, though their hushed discussions revealed their intrigue. As the plane commenced its descent, the captain's voice resonated through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. Please make sure your seat belts are fastened and your tray tables." As the cabin crew took their positions for landing, James adjusted his seat and leaned toward Celeste. "This will be over soon," he said softly. She offered him a small, reassuring smile, her hand briefly resting on his. In the galley, Veronica watched the clock, her chest tightening with each passing minute. She understood that landing would not bring solace, only more questions, more scrutiny, and probably more repercussions. Emily Stone's warning resonated in her thoughts. It's not over. Deep down, Veronica recognized that the worst was still ahead. The plane landed gently, the familiar jolt marking the conclusion of the flight. For most passengers, it was just another routine disembarkation. But for Veronica, it felt like the onset of her reckoning. She stood rigidly near the galley, her hands clutching the counter as passengers gathered their belongings. Her gaze drifted toward first class, where Michael Carter sat, composed and unhurried. Celeste leaned in closer to James while Liam quietly swung his legs. "What's the plan?" she asked softly, her voice barely rising above the surrounding noise. As passengers got ready to disembark, James's demeanor remained unchanged. "We wait," he said plainly. "Everything is already in motion." As the first-class passengers started to exit, several shot inquisitive looks at James and his family. One man paused momentarily by James's seat, hesitating before he spoke. "I'm sorry for what happened earlier," he said, his voice low yet sincere. "It wasn't right." James looked up, giving a slight nod. "Thank you," he replied. The man nodded in return and continued toward the exit, his expression pensive. Veronica stood by the main entrance of the plane, mustering a smile for the departing passengers. Each polite nod and whispered goodbye weighed more heavily than the last. She couldn't resist stealing a glance back at first class, where James and his family stayed seated, their unwillingness to join the throng of disembarking passengers twisting her stomach in knots. The galley phone buzzed, startling Veronica. She snatched it up, her voice trembling as she responded, "This is Veronica." It was the captain again, his tone sharp. "Security will be waiting at the gate. They've been... The executive team has informed you that you are to remain on board and give a complete account of your actions. Do not leave the plane until you receive further instructions." Veronica's heart sank. "Understood," she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper as she ended the call. Emily Stone approached her, her expression serious. "They're here, aren't they?" Emily Stone asked. Veronica nodded, feeling numb. "Security, the executives, probably the board," Emily Stone said, shaking her head. "I told you this wasn't over." As the last few passengers exited the plane, the cabin fell into an unsettling silence. Veronica turned to see James stand up. From his seat, smoothing his jacket while assisting Celeste in collecting their things, Liam held his toy airplane tightly, gazing up at his parents with a look of curiosity. Veronica stepped forward cautiously, her voice trembling. "Mr. Anderson, I want to apologize again for..." James raised a hand, interrupting her mid-sentence. His tone was steady yet firm. "Save it. The people waiting outside will hear everything you have to say." Celeste shot Veronica a frosty glance as she took Liam's hand and moved into the aisle, with James following closely behind them. A commanding presence filled the space effortlessly as the family neared the plane's exit. Two uniformed security officers boarded, exchanging brief nods with James before their gaze settled on Veronica. "Miss Summers," one officer stated, his tone resolute. Veronica felt her throat constrict. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "We need you to stay on the plane for questioning," the officer instructed. "Please follow us to the galley." James hesitated at the door, glancing back at Veronica. His expression remained composed, yet there was an underlying tension. The intensity in his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. Without uttering a single word, he exited the plane, his family trailing closely behind. As they vanished into the terminal, Veronica felt the heavy burden of her choices bearing down on her. The officers signaled for her to proceed toward the galley, and she complied, her legs quaking. The harsh truth struck her with undeniable clarity. Her future was no longer under her control. As the Anderson family entered the terminal, the ambiance transformed around them, disrupting the usual commotion. The passengers were momentarily distracted by the presence of two executives in tailored suits standing nearby. They appeared rigid, their professional demeanor concealing an underlying nervousness. One of them, a tall man with silver-rimmed glasses, approached James. "Mr. Anderson," he began, his tone a blend of apology and formality. "I'm David Reynolds, Vice President of Operations. On behalf of the airline, I want to express our sincerest apologies for the unacceptable treatment you and your family experienced today. We are addressing this matter with the utmost seriousness." James nodded. His expression was somewhat inscrutable as Celeste stood beside him, holding Liam's hand, her demeanor as poised as always. "I trust you," James replied, his tone steady yet incisive. "This isn't merely about us. It's about the standards your airline professes to uphold and how they fell short today." Richard visibly swallowed, adjusting his tie. "You are entirely correct, Mr. Anderson. We are already beginning a comprehensive review of our policies and training programs to ensure that nothing like this occurs again. I assure you, accountability will be enforced." James tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Accountability," he reiterated. "That's precisely what I expect. I also anticipate seeing concrete changes, not merely promises. Words alone won't mend the harm inflicted by actions or assumptions." Richard nodded swiftly. "We have already initiated the review of the incident. The flight attendant involved will be questioned and held accountable for her actions. If you have a moment, the CEO himself would like to meet with you to discuss this further." James glanced at Celeste, who gave a subtle nod. "Of the agreement scheduled the meeting?" James mentioned he would make time as the Andersons approached the baggage claim, while the executives remained behind, exchanging anxious looks. Meanwhile, on the plane, Veronica sat in the galley, flanked by two security officers. Her hands trembled slightly as she focused on the table before her. The atmosphere was thick with tension and silence. One of the officers finally spoke. Miss Summers, we will require a detailed statement regarding the events on this flight. The airline's executive team is already... As the complaint lodged by Mr. Anderson was reviewed, Veronica's eyes flickered between the two officers. I didn't know who he was, she stammered. I thought there was a problem with their tickets. One of the officers frowned, his gaze unwavering. Miss Summers, the problem wasn't with their tickets. It was with your actions. What led you to remove a family with confirmed first-class reservations? Veronica hesitated, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to articulate her thoughts. Her voice emerged weak and defensive. I was following protocol. I initially thought they might have been in the wrong section. First class is premium seating, and she caught herself, realizing how her words came across. The officer's expression grew stern, and Miss Summers didn't seem to fit the image. Veronica's face turned red. No, I didn't mean that. I made a mistake. I didn't intend for this to happen. The second officer leaned in, his tone more severe. Intentions are irrelevant here. What counts are your actions, and those actions have consequences. Do you understand? The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on Veronica. As she nodded rapidly, her throat parched. She felt trapped, each word she uttered seemingly pulling her further into a quagmire. I didn't intend to cause any harm, she stammered, her voice quaking. I was merely trying to do my job. The first officer shared a glance with his partner before responding. Your responsibility is to ensure that passengers are treated with respect and dignity. What transpired here today was the complete opposite. As Veronica sat in a stunned silence, the impact of their words enveloped her. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of her actions, not only for her own career, but also for the pain she had inflicted on the Anderson family. Her stomach twisted as she recalled James's steady, penetrating gaze and Celeste's serene yet formidable presence. She had misjudged them, and now she was confronting the consequences. Meanwhile, at the terminal, the Andersons reached the baggage claim, with Liam eagerly clutching his toy airplane as he watched the conveyor belt. James and Celeste remained composed, their tranquil demeanor masking the turmoil beneath. Concealing the storm of emotions underneath, Celeste asked in a hushed tone, Do you think they'll actually take action? James looked at her, his expression pensive. They won't have a choice, he replied. The airline's reputation is on the line. If they fail to respond, this will escalate into a much larger issue. As the conveyor belt started to move, James felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He took it out and read the notification. It was a message from his legal team confirming that the incident had already been brought to the attention of the airline's board. Directors, James's lips curled into a subtle smile as he tucked the phone away. They'll act, he stated matter-of-factly, his tone imbued with a quiet confidence. And if they don't, I'll ensure they regret it. The family gathered their luggage and made their way toward the exit, their steps firm and deliberate. Behind them, whispers from passengers who had witnessed the earlier incident filled the air. Some expressed sympathy, while others voiced outrage. Yet one thing was certain. The events of this flight would linger in memory for some time. For James, the day was far from over. With meetings to attend, decisions to make, and changes to implement, he stepped into the waiting car outside the terminal and took a final glance back at the airport. The storm he had initiated was just starting. The drive away from the airport was silent, yet the day's burdens loomed large. James gazed out the car window, his fingers lightly drumming on the leather seat. Beside him, Celeste rested her hand on Liam's lap as the boy slept, his toy airplane still held tightly in his small hands. The soft hum of the car engine filled the space. The sound filled the air, yet James's thoughts were anything but tranquil. We can't let this slide. Celeste finally broke the silence, her voice steady but laced with resolve. This isn't merely an affront to us. It signifies something much larger. If this can occur to us, think of how frequently it happens to those who lack the resources to stand up for themselves. James nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the cityscape passing by. I understand, he replied softly. That's why I've already begun to take action. This isn't solely about today. It's about establishing a foundation for the future. President Celeste reclined, her expression softening as she placed her trust in James's methodical approach and his capacity to transform personal grievances into significant change. Yet a part of her continued to simmer with anger over the humiliation they had faced. "It's not just me," she interjected, her tone sharpening. "It's the whole system that allowed this to happen." James turned to her, locking eyes with hers. "That's precisely what we're going to tackle," he asserted firmly as the car rolled into the driveway of their home. Liam stirred, rubbing his eyes and yawning. He picked him up and carried him inside, while James stayed in the car for a moment. He took out his phone and checked the messages from his legal team. There was already confirmation that the airline's board had been informed about the incident, along with an official statement from their public relations team expressing regret and vowing to take immediate action. However, James was not swayed by empty words or superficial damage control. He quickly drafted an email addressed to the airline's CEO and copied the board of directors. "The treatment my family and I received on Flight 237 today was unacceptable and indicative of more significant issues within your company. This situation transcends the actions of a single employee. It highlights a culture that permits such behavior. As a primary shareholder, I am requesting a comprehensive investigation into this incident and a detailed plan for corrective measures. This should include mandatory sensitivity and bias training for all employees, as well as the establishment of stronger accountability protocols, measures, and a public commitment to ensuring respect and fairness for every passenger. I expect a formal response within 48 hours detailing your proposed steps. Please understand that this is not a request. It is an expectation." After hitting send, James stepped out of the car, his mind focused on what lay ahead. Inside the house, Celeste was tucking Liam into bed. When she rejoined James in the living room, she found him seated at his desk, already reviewing documents on his laptop. "Do you think they'll listen?" she inquired while seated opposite him. "They won't have any option," James responded without raising his gaze. "This isn't merely a public relations concern for them. It's a liability, and I plan to ensure they grasp that." Meanwhile, at the airport, Veronica found herself in a stark conference room, her nerves on edge and her mind racing. She had been taken there after the security officers completed their preliminary questioning, and now she awaited the arrival of the airline's internal review team. The room was cold and silent, save for the ticking of a clock on the wall. The door swung open, and three individuals stepped inside. A man clad in a gray suit, a woman with defined features holding a clipboard, and a younger man with a laptop in hand. They settled into their seats opposite Veronica, their expressions unreadable, yet their presence commanding. "Miss Summers," the woman initiated, her tone efficient, "we have been assigned to carry out a preliminary review of the incident involving Flight 237. This is not a formal hearing, but we will be documenting your account thoroughly. Do you understand?" Veronica nodded rigidly, her voice momentarily trapped in her throat. The man in the gray suit adjusted his glasses and leaned in. "Let's start with a fundamental question. What prompted you to remove Mr. Anderson and his family from their first-class seats?" Veronica paused, her thoughts racing as she sought the right words. I believe there was an error," she replied softly. "I thought their tickets might not have been valid." The younger man typed something into his laptop, the sound of the keys resonating in the quiet room. The woman with the clipboard raised an eyebrow. "You thought?" she echoed. Regarding the moment when Veronica's face turned red, she noted they didn't resemble first-class passengers. Her admission came out as a soft whisper, causing the room to fall silent, the gravity of her words lingering. The woman with the clipboard shared a look with her colleagues before addressing her once more. "Miss Summers, do you comprehend the issues with that statement? First-class passengers are not determined by their looks." Veronica nodded rapidly, her palms clammy. "I understand that now," she replied, her voice shaking. "I made an error. I was simply—" As I attempted to fulfill my responsibilities, the man in the gray suit reclined, his expression inscrutable. "Your role," he articulated deliberately, "is to uphold the airline's policies and guarantee a positive experience for all passengers. Today, you have not succeeded, and this failure carries serious repercussions, not only for you, but for the entire company." Veronica gazed at her hands, the weight of her error settling in. She had believed she was asserting her authority, but instead she had revealed the flaws in her judgment, and now she was confronted with the fallout. The review team pressed on. They questioned her for what seemed like hours, scrutinizing every choice she had made during the flight. By the time the session concluded, Veronica felt empty, as if all vitality had been stripped away. She understood that her future with the airline was precarious, and she was uncertain how much longer it would last. As she was led out of the room, she noticed a large screen displaying news headlines. One in particular made her stomach churn. Primary airline shareholder demands reform after discriminatory incident on board. Veronica felt a deep sense of despair as it became evident that this was merely the start of the repercussions. The news of the incident spread rapidly. By the time the Anderson family returned home, headlines were already dominating social media and news platforms. Titles varied from airline in hot water after mistreatment of shareholders' family to discrimination on board, family forced to move despite first-class tickets. Each article depicted a harsh critique of the airline's policies or the absence of them. Meanwhile, James sat in his home office, scrolling through the extensive coverage. The response was incredibly strong, with public sentiment strongly supporting him. Users on social media voiced their anger and shared personal experiences of bias and unfair treatment, many directly tagging the airline and calling for answers and accountability. James's phone buzzed continuously with calls and messages, but he chose to ignore most of them, concentrating instead on getting ready for his meeting with the airline's CEO the next day. In the living room, Celeste watched a news segment that included a panel discussion about the incident, emphasizing that this issue extends beyond just one family. After being moved from their seats, one commentator suggested that this situation reflects the ongoing systemic biases in customer-facing industries. The fact that this family had to experience such humiliation, despite holding valid tickets, underscores a more profound issue. Celeste muted the television, her expression contemplative, and turned to Liam, who was joyfully constructing a tower with his blocks, completely oblivious to the turmoil surrounding them. She envied his innocence but felt an even stronger resolve to safeguard it. The ordeal had unsettled her, yet it also served as a reminder. The reason they couldn't move past this was clear. Meanwhile, at the airline's headquarters, the executive team was in full crisis mode. CEO Robert Lang stood at the head of the conference room table, his expression somber. Surrounding him, senior executives scrutinized reports, media coverage, and social media analytics. The situation was rapidly deteriorating, and with each passing hour, the negative press intensified. "This is a disaster," one executive remarked, rifling through a pile of documents. "We've faced PR challenges before, but this is different. It involves one of our primary shareholders. If we don't manage this situation with care, we risk losing him and, even more critically, damaging our reputation." Robert raised a hand, quieting the room. "What's the status on the internal review?" he inquired, his tone sharp. A senior HR manager cleared her throat. "We've finished the preliminary questioning with the flight attendant involved. Her actions were evidently influenced by bias, although she asserts it was unintentional. She has been suspended pending further investigation." Robert frowned, his jaw tightening. "Suspended? That's insufficient. We are dealing with a shareholder we have direct access to our board, and it's crucial that we demonstrate decisive action." Another executive interjected carefully, stating that we are preparing an official apology and outlining new training initiatives. "We've already contacted Mr. Anderson's team to arrange a meeting." Robert nodded, though his expression stayed tense. "That's good, but it won't suffice to placate him. He's not merely angry, he understands leverage. He will advocate for systemic change, and we must be prepared to respond." The room fell silent, the gravity of his words resonating with everyone present. Recognize the gravity of the situation. This was not merely about settling a single event, but rather confronting a culture that had permitted such an event to happen initially. Back at her apartment, Veronica sat on her couch, gazing vacantly at the termination notice displayed on her laptop screen. The message from HR was succinct and unfeeling. "Your actions during Flight 237 were considered a breach of our company's fundamental values and customer service policies." Your employment with the airline is terminated effective immediately. Her hands shook. As she reread the email, the words began to blur together. In just one day, her career had unraveled. The job she had taken pride in for years was now gone, and she had no one to blame but herself. Veronica's phone buzzed with notifications, texts from friends and family who had seen the news. Most messages were sympathetic, but a few were harshly critical. She chose not to respond to any of them. The weight of shame was too much, and she wasn't ready to confront the full reality of her failure. She turned on the television, seeking a distraction, but instead she found herself faced with a news anchor reporting on the incident. The words hit hard. The airline's response to the situation had ignited anger, especially in light of the evident racial implications of the flight attendant's behavior. This served as a harsh reminder that unconscious bias can lead to significant harm. Veronica turned off the TV, burying her face in her hands. She had believed her actions were innocuous, that she was merely adhering to protocol, but now the reality was painfully clear. Her biases had obscured her judgment, and her hasty decisions had consequences. The judgment had inflicted harm not only on the Andersons, but also on the reputation of the company she cherished. For the first time, Veronica felt the profound impact of her actions, not just the loss of her job, but the damage she had caused to others. She picked up her laptop, pausing briefly before composing an email. The recipient was the Anderson family. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Anderson," she began, "I am writing to sincerely apologize for my actions on Flight 237. I now understand how my biases influence my decisions, and I deeply regret the pain and humiliation I inflicted on your family. My actions were inexcusable, and I fully accept responsibility for them." She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. While she didn't anticipate forgiveness, she felt compelled to convey her remorse. After completing the email, she hit send and leaned back, gazing at the screen. It was a small step, but it was all she could manage. As night descended, James sat in his study, reviewing a draft of the airline's proposed reform plan. It was comprehensive, detailing mandatory training programs and new accountability measures. Dedicated to nurturing a more inclusive culture, James recognized that mere words were insufficient for genuine transformation. Celeste walked in, cradling a cup of tea. "Is this what you wanted?" she inquired, indicating the documents on his desk. James glanced up, his expression contemplative. "It's a beginning," he replied, "but it's not enough. Not yet." He placed the papers aside and accepted the tea from her, his gaze softening. "This isn't solely about penalizing one individual. It's about making sure no one else has to endure what we have." Celeste nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Then let's ensure they follow through." James offered a faint smile, his determination unwavering. The fight was far from over, but so was his resolve. The following morning, James arrived at the airline's headquarters for his scheduled meeting with William Hayes, the CEO. The building was sleek and modern, rising above the busy city streets. In the lobby, a professional-looking assistant greeted James, her demeanor respectful yet noticeably anxious. "Mr. Anderson," she said with a slight bow. Her head turned as Mr. Langston anticipated his arrival. James followed her through the gleaming corridors, his steps measured and purposeful. The employees they passed exchanged discreet glances, fully aware of his identity and the reason for his visit. Upon reaching the executive conference room, the assistant opened the door and motioned for him to enter. William Hayes stood to welcome James, extending his hand. "Mr. Anderson, thank you for making the time to meet with us. We sincerely regret the circumstances that have led us here." James accepted the handshake. With a calm yet resolute expression, he extended his hand for a handshake. Leighton wasted no time and took a seat, stating that regret holds value only when accompanied by action. Robert nodded, his expression growing serious. "I completely agree. Let me outline the steps we've already implemented," he said, gesturing toward a large screen on the wall that showcased a comprehensive presentation. "Our response encompasses several immediate measures," Robert continued. "First, the flight attendant in question has been terminated, and we have also initiated mandatory sensitivity and bias training. For all employees in customer-facing roles, we are introducing a more rigorous accountability framework to tackle and avert incidents like this moving forward. James listened attentively, his gaze shifting across the slides displayed on the screen. The suggested changes were thorough, yet he remained cautious about accepting them without further scrutiny. Once Robert concluded, James leaned in, hands clasped. "This is a step in the right direction," he remarked, "but let's not kid ourselves that terminating one individual and rolling out training programs alone will suffice. We'll address the fundamental problems. This isn't merely a single event, but rather the overall culture within your organization. It requires more than just policy revisions. It demands ongoing, quantifiable transformation." Robert appeared apprehensive but agreed, acknowledging your point. "We're dedicated to making sure this extends beyond superficial adjustments." James lightly tapped the table, his voice calm and firm. "I expect monthly updates on the progress of these changes. I want to review data, employee feedback, incident trends, and measurable advancements. An independent review carried out by an external party, rather than your internal team." Robert paused briefly before nodding again. "We can make that happen. Is there anything else?" James's expression grew more serious. "Yes, I also want a public apology, not just to my family, but to every passenger who has faced discrimination while flying with your airline. This is not solely about me. It's about establishing a precedent." Robert's demeanor became more rigid, yet he refrained from disputing it. "Understood. We will issue a formal statement today." James leaned back, his demeanor composed yet authoritative. "Good. I'll keep a close eye, Mr. Langston. Don't confuse my willingness to cooperate with a lack of urgency." The atmosphere was thick with tension as Robert nodded again. "We won't let you down," he said softly. As James exited the headquarters, his phone vibrated with notifications. Social media was alive with chatter about the incident, with hashtags like #airline accountability and #bias in flight trending worldwide. James quickly scrolled through the posts, observing the broad support alongside demands for more profound systemic change. This issue extended beyond mere surface-level concerns. His family anymore, it had turned into a focal point for a broader discussion back home. Celeste sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open as she perused an email from the airline's PR team. The message detailed their intended public statement, which included an apology and a pledge to tackle the concerns raised by the incident. Celeste forwarded the email to James with a brief note. "What do you think?" As James walked in, setting his bag down, he read it and responded with a single word. "Adequate." Celeste glanced up as he entered the kitchen. A knowing smile graced her lips as she playfully remarked, "That's high praise coming from you." James chuckled, leaning against the counter. "It's a start," he replied, "but there's still a long way to go." Celeste nodded, her expression contemplative. "Do you think they'll actually follow through? Or is this merely damage control?" James's eyes narrowed slightly. "If they don't follow through, I'll ensure they regret it," he said. The ripple effects of the incident were already evident, with employees huddled in break rooms and hallways, whispering about the impending changes. Some were relieved by the emphasis on bias and accountability, while others were doubtful that such a large company could swiftly transform its culture. Meanwhile, Veronica was absent. Her termination had sparked hushed discussions among her former colleagues, many of whom were taken aback by how rapidly events had unfolded. However, for those who had observed her behavior directly, the agreement was evident. She had overstepped, and the repercussions were inevitable. Emily Stone, who had collaborated closely during the flight with Veronica, she reflected on the experience as she got ready for her shift. She had always been aware of the flaws in the airline's culture, but witnessing them so openly displayed was a revelation. She promised to change her approach at work, making sure that no passenger would ever feel the way the Andersons did that evening. As James and Silas got ready for bed, Liam peeked into their room, his toy airplane held tightly in his hand. "Mommy, Daddy," he asked, his voice soft, "are people still mad about what happened?" On the plane, James knelt down and embraced Liam in a gentle hug. "Some people are upset, buddy," he said softly, "but it's because they want things to improve, and we're helping them do that." Liam nodded, his eyes wide. "Are you going to fix it?" James smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "That's the plan." As Liam returned to his room, Celeste looked at James, her expression a blend of pride and determination. "We are going to fix it," she said quietly. "Not just for us, but for everyone." James nodded, his resolve unshaken. "This isn't the end," he replied. "This is merely the start." The next morning, news outlets were abuzz with the airline's public statement that had been released overnight. The apology was comprehensive and straightforward, recognizing the incident involving the Anderson family and detailing the immediate measures being implemented to tackle the larger issues. The statement included, in part, "We sincerely regret the incident that took place on Flight 237 involving Mr. Anderson and his family. This event does not align with our values, and we are dedicated to taking significant action to prevent such occurrences. In light of recent events, we are taking immediate action by introducing mandatory training programs, reinforcing our policies, and engaging a third-party review of our organizational practices to promote equity and respect for all passengers." The statement concluded with a heartfelt apology to the Anderson family, acknowledging James's position as a shareholder and, more significantly, as a valued customer who deserved better. Social media was abuzz with responses. While some praised the airline for acknowledging its errors, others expressed differing views. Doubtful, he questioned the company's motives, suggesting it was merely an attempt to manage the fallout. The hashtags Chalmers Accountability, Matters, and Flyfair persisted in trending, igniting discussions about inherent biases within customer service sectors. James read the statement at the breakfast table, his demeanor contemplative. Celeste, sitting opposite him with a cup of coffee, observed him intently. "So, what do you think?" she asked. "It's a decent first step," James replied, placing his phone down. "But now they need to demonstrate their sincerity." Celeste nodded, her expression grave. "And what about Veronica? Do you believe she gained any insights from this experience?" James paused, reflecting on the question. "That's not for me to decide," he replied at last. "But I hope she did. Individuals like her contribute to the issue, yet they can also be instrumental in the solution if they choose to evolve." Meanwhile, Veronica remained in her modest apartment, endlessly scrolling through the same news reports. The airline's public apology had barely alleviated her feelings of guilt. If anything, it intensified them. Each headline, every comment regarding the incident felt deeply personal. Indictment, she opened her email inbox, revisiting the message she had sent to the Anderson family the previous night. There had been no reply yet, but she hadn't anticipated one. She questioned whether she was worthy of forgiveness, yet sending the apology felt essential, a small stride toward accountability. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her contemplation. It was a text from Emily Stone. "Emily Stone, I heard about your termination. I hope you're holding up. This situation has been chaotic, but perhaps it's an opportunity for a new beginning." Veronica gazed at the message, for after a lengthy pause, Veronica finally responded. "Thanks, Emily Stone. I'm trying. There's so much on my mind." Emily Stone replied swiftly, "If you ever want to talk, just let me know. We've all made mistakes. It's how we learn from them that counts." Veronica set her phone down, her thoughts racing. Emily Stone's words resonated with her. It was about learning from mistakes. Unsure of her next move, she realized she couldn't revert to her former self. Change needed to begin, and it had to start with her at the airline's headquarters, Robert. Langston stood before the board of directors, detailing the company's reform plan. James occupied a seat at the end of the table, his silent presence demanding attention. The atmosphere was charged as Robert explained the upcoming changes, from new training initiatives to independent evaluations. Once Robert concluded, he turned to James. "Mr. Anderson, we believe these measures will effectively tackle the concerns you've highlighted. We appreciate your input and your dedication to ensuring our accountability." James leaned in, his expression focused. "This is a solid beginning," he remarked. "This is merely the beginning, and I will be monitoring the situation closely to make sure these changes translate into action rather than remaining empty promises." The board members exchanged apprehensive looks, yet none were willing to challenge James. His influence was evident, and his determination left little room for uncertainty. As the meeting concluded, one of the board members approached James. She was an older woman with a warm yet earnest demeanor. "Mr. Anderson," she said, I want you to know that some of us on the board fully support you. This is the kind of accountability our airline needs. Needed for a long time. James nodded, offering a small smile. I appreciate that, he said. Now let's make sure it happens. Later that day, as James returned home, he found Celeste in the backyard watching Liam play with a toy plane. The boy ran around laughing, mimicking the sound of an engine. James stood beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. Meeting went well, he said simply. Celeste smiled. I'm glad. Did you give them the usual no excuses talk? James chuckled. Something like that. They watched Liam for a moment in comfortable silence. After a moment of silence, Celeste finally spoke, her voice gentle. Do you think we'll ever stop having to fight these battles? James sighed, his expression contemplative. Probably not, he admitted. But every fight brings us closer to something better. And as long as we keep pushing, change is inevitable. Celeste rested her head against his shoulder. Well, if anyone can make it happen, it's you. James smiled, his gaze unwavering. It's us, he corrected. We're in this together. As Liam's laughter filled the air, the burden of the past few days began to lift. The journey wasn't over, but we were prepared for whatever lay ahead. The repercussions of the incident involving Flight 237 continued to resonate, reshaping discussions around bias and accountability, not only within the airline, but throughout the aviation sector. News outlets covered the airline's reforms, celebrating it as a pivotal moment in how companies confront systemic challenges. Other airlines initiated similar evaluations of their policies, motivated by public pressure and the undeniable impact of Michael Carter's actions. The narrative of the Anderson family gained further prominence. More than just a headline, it transformed into a catalyst for change. Advocacy groups seized the incident as a rallying point, calling for improved training and policies throughout customer service industries. Social media was abuzz with accounts from passengers who had experienced similar discrimination, their voices amplified by the focus on the airline's response. At home, James and Celeste observed the unfolding events with cautious optimism. It wasn't about the recognition or praise. It was about witnessing genuine change take hold. Their struggle it had always been about ensuring that no one else would have to suffer the same fate. One afternoon, James received an email from the CEO of the airline with the subject line simply stating, "Progress Report." The message outlined the initial outcomes of the reforms. Mandatory training programs had been initiated, with over 80% of employees completing the first phase. A third-party review had commenced, and the initial findings pointed out areas needing further enhancement. Additionally, there was a personal note from William Hayes. That's a wrap. We appreciate your commitment to holding us accountable. Your dedication to doing what's right has truly improved our company, and we're just getting started. James forwarded the email to Celeste, adding his own note. Step 1 complete, moving on to step 2. Meanwhile, Veronica sat in a cozy coffee shop, browsing job listings on her laptop. Since her termination, she had spent the week reflecting on the events that transpired. The regrets still stung, but she was resolute in not allowing it to define her. She had started attending workshops on unconscious bias and diversity, aiming to seeking clarity on her past mistakes and ways to improve. She took a sip of her coffee as her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was a response from the Anderson family, one she hadn't anticipated. Miss Summers, it began, thank you for your apology. While we cannot change what occurred, we appreciate your recognition of the harm caused. Growth starts with accountability, and we hope you continue to pursue it. Veronica gazed at the email, a lump rising in her throat. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was progress. She closed her laptop. Resolve strengthening, she couldn't alter the past, but she had the power to create a brighter future, one choice at a time. A month later, James boarded another flight with his family. This time, the mood was different. The staff welcomed them with warmth, their professionalism steadfast. As they settled into their first-class seats, Celeste turned to James with a playful smile. Do you think they recognize you? She asked. James laughed, shaking his head. It doesn't matter if they do. What truly matters is that everyone is being treated with the respect they deserve. As the plane taxied down the runway, Liam leaned over, holding up his toy airplane. "We're flying again, Daddy," he exclaimed, his face glowing with excitement. "Yes, we are," James replied, smiling at his son. He glanced at Celeste, her calm and radiant presence always grounding him. This was what it was all for. Not power, not recognition, but the simple dignity of being treated fairly. As the plane ascended into the sky, James leaned back in his seat, watching the clouds drift past the window, knowing the work was never truly complete. There would always be more to strive for, more to enhance. Yet in this moment, he permitted himself a brief respite, aware that the journey they had embarked upon was already creating an impact. At times, he believed that was sufficient. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Until next time, the story of the Anderson family's mistreatment on Flight 237 teaches us an important lesson. Never judge others based on appearances or biases. Veronica's actions, driven by unconscious bias, had serious consequences, losing her job and causing harm. This highlights the importance of fairness and respect in all interactions, especially in customer service. Additionally, the story highlights the power of accountability. James used his influence to demand systemic change, benefiting not only his family, but others who face similar injustices. Racial and social bias persist in every industry, from retail to aviation. High-profile cases involving racism in stores or unequal treatment in public spaces mirror the Anderson family's experience. Social media movements like Black Lives Matter amplify the call for equity, reflecting a cultural shift toward confronting systemic issues. This story resonates with ongoing debates about diversity, inclusion, and the need for accountability in corporate America, where companies face scrutiny for failing to uphold equity. Reflecting on personal biases through diversity education or training to avoid snap judgments. Treating everyone equally, regardless of appearance, race, or status, in professional and personal contexts. Speaking out against unfair treatment, whether in the workplace or in public, to promote systemic improvement. Applying principles that will help individuals contribute to a more equitable society, consistent with American values of justice and opportunity. The Anderson family's story reminds us that change begins with individual responsibility and collective action, ensuring dignity for all.